removing anger. In the 1950s, an American psychoanalytic therapist severed his Freudian roots and turned to the Stoics to form a radically new form of therapy. Rather than plumbing the depths of the content of a problem and exploring how a stumbling block might relate to, say, one's early psychosexual development, Albert Ellis argued that we should look at whatever process sustains the issue in the present. The result was rational therapy, later known as rational emotive behavior therapy, or REBT. Having had an interest in philosophy since his teenage years, Ellis explained, "I really got my main theory that people largely upset themselves from ancient philosophers, some of the Asians, but also from Greeks and Romans." Ellis built on the work of Émile Coué, who had encouraged patients to work with his new science of conscious autosuggestion. "Every day in every way I'm getting better and better," the French pharmacist encourages patients to tell themselves. But Ellis wasn't convinced. He said, "If she keeps saying to herself much louder and more often, 'I'm really a shit, I'm no fucking good, I'll never possibly get better,' all the positive thinking in the world isn't going to help her." Ellis's REBT eventually joined forces with the cognitive therapy of Aaron Beck, who developed a groundbreaking means of treating depression. Beck had encouraged his patients to monitor and evaluate their negative thoughts and how they related to their feelings and actions. He helped them replace the unhelpful thoughts with more positive ones through a rational process of sifting for evidence that could support or undermine the anxiety in question. Then the patient would apply the same process to deeper beliefs, which might be responsible for generating such negative thoughts in the first place. This is a truly cognitive model, and recognizably a systemized version of the Stoic approach. Together, they formed cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, which has since become enormously popular. It claims to be evidence-based and therefore highly effective, especially for anxiety-related issues. CBT practitioners often insist that traditional psychoanalysis remains a lengthy, expensive form of therapy with highly ambiguous, difficult-to-measure results. On the other hand, those preferring the longer-form therapy of Freudian, Jungian, or other schools often argue that the CBT approach merely deals with symptoms rather than the root causes. Most psychotherapists today offer an eclectic approach to suit the patient and the problems he or she brings to the office. CBT certainly offers us a clear model of how anger arises. It's not only enormously helpful for untangling this and other oppressive, overpowering emotions, but also follows logically from our understanding of the Stoic approach. 2,000 years after its conception, Stoicism has been taken up again as a form of therapy. The parallels between CBT and Stoicism remain remarkably striking. The only major difference, worth bearing in mind, is that CBT is about fixing certain troubles, whereas the key vision of Stoicism is the enhancement of an ordinary life to connect more powerfully to one's fellow human beings and to move more in accord with the universe. There is a love drive at the heart of the ancient school, which is not present in the problem-specific raison d'etre of CBT. Yet one can't help but feel that Seneca would have had a keen interest in this modern therapy, and perhaps a sense of pride that his own letters and essays, through an accident of survival, have changed the lives of countless people for the better. In CBT, we find the Stoic insistence that it is our judgments that cause us problems, as opposed to events themselves, the instigation of more appropriate alternative judgments, and the instruction to systematically review one's work. Both have us question what is in our control and what is not, and remind us, when we're at the mercy of our over-imaginative narratives, to return to the present moment rather than fixate upon past or future. In the CBT model, anger begins with a trigger. Someone cuts us up on the motorway. An event occurs which, as we normally see it, makes us angry, but as the model continues along familiar Stoic lines, we see that of course the story is more complicated and gives us plenty of opportunity to elicit change. So firstly, after the trigger, we form a judgment. That selfish prick, we might conclude, just cut me up. He must be punished. Secondly, the next factor that comes into play is that of our inhibitions. What do we feel it's okay to do to someone who's swerved in front of us? Should we merely glare, raise a middle finger, or vow to avenge ourselves further along the road? Is it permissible to get out of the car and kick the other driver's car? What rules do we follow in this situation. Our inhibitions are a hugely important buffer between what we feel like doing and what we consider it appropriate to do. So thirdly, finally, we have the resulting behavior. We shout, kick, sulk, or in the case of one man filmed in the grip of road rage and posted on YouTube, leap on the bonnet of the offending moving car and smash straight through the windscreen with a fist before being thrown onto the road. So here is our core process: trigger to judgment to inhibitions to behavior. There are other factors too which bear upon the entire process. Our core beliefs about the world and what happens in it will play a huge part. If we believe that people are essentially selfish and out for themselves, then our judgment that follows a trigger event will be very different from those of someone who believes people to be essentially decent and good-natured. Likewise, if we believe that it's appropriate to hit a spouse if he or she deserves it, our inhibitions will affect us quite differently in a heated domestic argument from another person who follows a life rule that you should never do such a thing. So our relevant beliefs might be about the world and other people, or they may relate to what we deem appropriate in our own behavior. They can have an enormous effect on our judgments and our inhibitions. Likewise, our mood at the time of these events will play a huge part in what happens along that line leading to the final behavior. If I'm hungry, I become irritable. I become snappy and joyless before I even realize that low blood sugar is the cause. A world that half an hour ago was populated by smiling, sexy, and fascinating individuals is now full of people getting in my way. The joy I previously found at my partner's silly and comical mood is now replaced with an impatience directed at his childish refusal to take urgent matters seriously. Not infrequently, after a disturbed night of intermittent slumber, I've been delivered from sleep by the jarring electronic cacophony of my alarm clock and started the day in a foggy, fuming funk. Such mornings leave me poised for confrontation, and worse, cause me to mumble anything I need to say in a morose fashion that efficiently infects others with my wretchedness and irascibility as they struggle to understand me. Thus, factors such as our beliefs, moods, and our levels of tiredness and hunger impact greatly upon that sequence of trigger to judgment to inhibition to behavior. The Stoics and their admirers have left us with several interesting ways of making adjustments to one or more of these areas in order to interrupt what can otherwise become a tiring and destructive pattern. But we have, by absorbing the crux of Epictetus's teaching that it's not events that cause our problems, but our appraisal of them, we've already made the biggest and most important leap by fully accepting the fact that we are responsible for our angry responses and not those who anger us. We're crossing the wide river to more tranquil pastures from which it is very difficult to return. With that in mind, what other practical means might help us further assuage our anger and enjoy a calmer existence? Seneca wisely points out that there's no one answer to fit everyone. Different remedies will work for different people. Clients of a cognitive behavioral therapist are helped to study the specifics that propel them from experiencing a trigger to exhibiting anger or anxiety or any other undesired response. For our purposes, we can look at the suggestions given by the various thinkers we've encountered and find what works for us in particular situations. As we do this, we should keep in mind an analogy of Plutarch's. Painters will step back from their work and periodically inspect it. Continuous familiarity, he says, hides the ways in which something might vary slightly from what is required. So by interrupting their viewing, they use repeated discrimination to keep the viewing fresh and more likely to catch minor variations. Plutarch suggests we should ask friends for feedback as to how we are. We should make ourselves available, quote, for periodic inspection, to examine our habits and character, quote, to see if over a period of time any good features have been added or bad ones subtracted. His proposal that we should be open to this sort of criticism might be a challenge to us. It would be easy to build a straw man of this idea and suggest that if we listen to everyone's opinions about ourselves, then we'd be living a life of trying to appeal to everyone and having no clear sense of who we really are. But this is not what Plutarch is suggesting. The valued opinions of a few friends who know us well could be of enormous benefit. Given the importance we tend to ascribe to how we come across to other people, it is astonishing that we're so hostile to honest feedback. Criticisms make us defensive or upset, and flattery sinks in too deeply. If we wish to make progress with a character trait, such as minimizing anger, we'd be well advised to start asking trusted friends how we're doing. There is surely no more direct route to self-deception than the avoidance of feedback. Although different approaches will be suitable for different people depending on the way their anger forms, and therefore where in their cognitive behavioral chain the solution is to be found, the ancients offer plenty of advice that we might wish to take on board. There is a consensus, for example, that when anger flares up, the best time to intervene with the lessons of philosophy is immediately. Plutarch continues with his fire metaphor. I quote, "Anyone who doesn't fuel a fire puts it out, and anyone who doesn't feed anger in the early stages and doesn't get into a huff is being prudent and is eliminating anger." Seneca uses a military metaphor. We are talking about warfare and must make sure our frontier guards are alert. In true Stoic form, we must remain vigilant. And I quote Seneca, "The best course is to reject at once the first incitement to anger, to resist even its small beginnings, and to take pains to avoid falling into anger. For if it begins to lead us astray, the return to the safe path is difficult, since if once we admit the emotion and by our own free will granted any authority, reason becomes of no avail. After that it'll do not whatever you let it, but whatever it chooses. The enemy, I repeat, must be stopped at the very frontier, for if he has passed it and advanced within the city gates, he will not respect any bounds set by his captives." These are strong words. The kind of rational techniques taught by the Stoics must be applied straight away before anger gains any ground. From the point of view of narrative forming, we would wish to form a compelling but helpful story about the event, that is, one that does not make us angry, before we shape one that insists we should be furious. Plutarch has a softer alternative image. When a father sees a child struggling to cut up his dinner with a knife, he takes the knife from her in order to do the job more effectively. The meat needs to be cut, the child cannot do it well, so the grown-up takes over. Likewise, if an event has made us angry, then it may be that punishment should be executed and an injustice corrected. However, our childish anger, knowing no license, cannot do that effectively. We should instead pass the knife to our rational selves before any damage is done, in order to ensure that the job is carried out correctly. Our aims are not merely to avoid anger, they're also to deal with the situation at hand constructively and appropriately. Here then are some ways of undoing our fury before it takes hold. 1. Wait. Perhaps the most widely recommended technique for nipping anger in the bud is simply to wait. Time is a vital factor in allowing anger to dissipate. I came across a useful metaphor in Overcoming Anger and Irritability, William Davis's practical book of cognitive behavioral techniques for those troubled or debilitated by this particular problem. He describes anger in terms of a leaky bucket. It gets filled, can overflow if we keep topping it up, but if we give it time, our anger will dribble away. Today, we're sometimes advised to hold our tongue and count to 10 when we feel angry. This modern stratagem is in origin a Stoic precaution, a not terrible but rather weak solution that may not be adequate in some situations. But the instigation of delay was a highly recommended piece of ancient advice. Let the matter await your leisure, Epictetus recommends in his handbook. Seneca, in his On Anger, clarifies that we delay not to simply switch off from the issue at hand, but so that we make better judgments as to how to act. He says, "The best corrective of anger lies in delay. Beg this concession from anger at the first, not in order that it may pardon, but in order that it may judge. Its first assaults are heavy. It will leave off if it waits." Plutarch too emphasizes this important reason for delaying. He finds the time by having people defend themselves and listening to the reasons for their actions. He says, "Learning how to punish in a well-timed, moderate, beneficial, and appropriate way will not stop one punishing altogether. So I try to quell my anger above all by not denying the defendants their right to justify themselves, but by listening to what they have to say. This helps because time checks emotion and gives it space to dissolve, and also because rationality finds what method of punishment is appropriate and how much is fitting." The Stoics' advice can seem rather cool for hot-headed situations. Plutarch, though, is right. If when angry with someone we first allow them to explain themselves, and if we actually listen to what they say, we can allow our anger to dissolve. We want to hang on to our anger because we feel we need it to effectively communicate something important. But this is wrong. It only gets in the way and makes people less likely to understand us. Perhaps it would help us to call anger by another name: panic. Usually when we're angry, we are scared. We're scared that someone's actions will leave us helpless or in some way betrayed, overwhelmed, or abandoned. We might be scared that we will lose our autonomy. We're angry with others for not doing their jobs properly because we in turn are then forced to struggle even more under our own pressures. We're angry at bad service because we feel ourselves being undermined or unheard. I've said that we tend to suffer from one of two basic fears, the fear of abandonment or the fear of being overwhelmed. The former tends to make us meet stress with anxiety, the latter to retreat. With a little thought, we can normally identify which one rings most true for us. Do we recharge by being alone or by being in company? In everyday reality, we might shift from one to the other as different situations present their own challenges. A fear of abandonment is evident in our feeling of rejection when our partner intimates he'd rather spend an afternoon reading than come shopping with us. We need reassurance that he does not prefer his own company to ours. Or conversely, we might like the idea of making a trip alone and feel overwhelmed when our partner is eager to accompany us. One person needs to hear of his partner's jealousy to know he is valued, another finds it stifling and exhausting. One yearns for space, another intimacy. Less obviously, 1,000 daily distractions bring us up against these fundamental fears, and the panic they engender often results in displays of anger. Waiting and listening allows the panic to subside. The advice to wait is clearly effective in cases where one would otherwise strike out with ill-judged aggression, but it might ring rather hollow to those of us who are not prone to such outbursts. Some of us, hating the idea of snapping angrily at a partner and starting an argument, prefer to sulk. We are forcibly struck by the tendencies of those we love to express their moments of anger with abandon, with a sort of sarcastic comment or put down that we feel, inaccurately, that we would never employ. Unable to reciprocate as the idea of an argument makes us feel quietly anxious, we absorb it and silently play out our responses over the next 24 hours. Firstly, we regret our partner's preparedness to make such hurtful comments. We consider all the kindnesses we thanklessly bestow upon them, and consider that perhaps it is our lot to never be fully appreciated. Replaying to ourselves their hurtful comment, we grasp the anger we feel, and from that emotional starting point engage in imaginary dialogues with our beloved, in which we bring up the subject at hand, and they are entirely unapologetic. As we play these fanciful conversations to ourselves, our anger increases. We're topping up that leaky bucket, seeing now a pattern of behavior in the person dearest to us from which there is no escape. Thus we fantasize about leaving them, finding the idea not so awful, and eventually work ourselves into such a state that we're now blaming them for provoking such an enormous amount of resentment. Why must they be so bloody-minded not to realize that a nasty comment can ruin our day? Then, still obsessing over the event a day later, we are aware that to bring it up would seem ridiculous, an admission of our exhausting neurotic tendencies and one that would probably start the argument we wish to avoid. So finding ourselves caught unhappily between expressing our upset, which now seems silly and provocative, and continuing to sulk, but this has been going on for long enough that we should surely say something, we let our silent anger bubble and brew. For those of us prone to this kind of stewing, it would do us good to remember that if our partners tend to blurt out their irritation with hurtful comments, then they're probably not doing so with the same intensity of feelings that it would take for us to do the same. We would only make those comments if we had been pushed to our limit. They don't. They most likely get it out of their system in an angry moment and then forget about it. We shouldn't presume that it's meant with the venom that we would have implied. Perhaps then a proviso to the Stoic instruction to wait is in order. For those who become silently, privately angry, remember that the point of delay is to spare others a misjudged response, not an excuse to merely sulk. Such resentfulness spreads a potent poison through all other interactions with the person in question, for no reason other than wounded pride. There's always the possibility to address lingering anger or resentment as long as one does it respectfully. You make me angry, or you are so weird, is neither respectful nor truthful, because the anger and sense of weirdness do not come from the other person. They come from the story we have made up. To phrase our grudges in this accusatory way is to trigger fears within the other and cause them to think, I'm incompatible with this person, I'm not good enough, I am not normal. Our unhelpful reaction, born of our own fear that things are not right, that our world is crumbling in some small but scary way, triggers reciprocal fear in the other person. Instead, there's much power in simply stating how one feels as if it were one's own problem. I feel this way when you do that thing. By respectfully avoiding the other person's fear triggers and making no accusations, the thorny subject can usually be broached sometime after the event without an argument ensuing. So we need wait only long enough to consider our phrasing and take responsibility for our feelings. To wait so long that we never bring up our concerns is likely to do both parties a disservice. Expressing our unhappiness in a sensitive way is one of the most productive things we can do in a relationship. If we delay, what should we do in the meantime? The Stoics knew, we remember, that venting our anger only serves to make it worse. Plutarch acknowledges that venting unhappy feelings may sometimes be of use, but certainly not in the case of anger. And I quote him here, "It may be that mourners eliminate a lot of their grief as well as their tears in the release of crying and weeping, but anger is made considerably more intense by the behavior and speech of people in an angry state." Instead, Seneca suggests we do the opposite. Hide our response with a display of serenity. If we simply refuse to give it expression, especially in those early moments, we've conquered it at the vital moment. Seneca says, "Do battle with yourself. If you have the will to conquer anger, it cannot conquer you. Your conquest has begun if it's hidden away, if it's given no outlet. Let us conceal the signs of it, and as far as possible, let us keep it hidden and secret. This will cost us a great deal of trouble, for it is eager to leap out and inflame the eyes and alter the face. But if it is allowed to display itself outside ourselves, it is then on top of us. In the lowest recesses of the heart, let it be hidden away, and let it not drive, but be driven. Moreover, let us change all its symptoms into the opposite. Let the expression on our faces be relaxed, our voices gentler, our steps measured. Little by little, outer features mold inner ones." Is Seneca right? Psychologists, as we've noted, have now reversed their 1970s opinions and support this idea that venting our anger is not good for us. In fact, they have now empirically fortified the suggestion, offered by Seneca and observed in Socrates before him, that we can affect our inner state by changing such outward features as our facial expression and our postures. I've realized by means of example that my shoulders tend to roll forward. This can give me a somewhat hunched posture, created by an inordinate amount of time sitting on sofas reading or typing, precisely as I am now. My gym instructor suggested that I correct this stance when I walk, and I soon noticed that by moving my shoulders back, creating a much more open stance, I immediately felt a sense of authority and connection with others that I'd hitherto not felt when out and about. Perhaps between a preference for not drawing attention to myself in public and the physical placement of my hunched shoulders, I had come to feel rather invisible on the street. The sudden shift in my mood, engendered by this point of correction, was startling to me and a little unsettling, as I felt far more conspicuous, and I imagine I was. An open posture will attract the attention of people far more than a less inviting, self-contained attitude. I have since returned to the slouch. 2. Resist curiosity. Another approach to not being disturbed by anger might be to entirely avoid it in the first place. The Stoic approach to dealing with this emotion is only necessary if we're forced into confronting it. Meanwhile, and I quote Seneca, "The best course is to look out for obstacles to our known weaknesses, and above all to order the mind in such a way that even when struck by the most serious and sudden events, either it does not feel anger or buries deep any anger arising from the gravity of so unforeseen an affront, or does not acknowledge that it has been hurt." One interesting means of avoiding anger altogether is suggested by both Seneca and Plutarch after him: be less curious. Seneca writes, "Do you want to avoid losing your temper? Resist the impulse to be curious. The man who tries to find out what has been said against him, who seeks to unearth spiteful gossip, even when engaged in privately, is destroying his own peace of mind." Plutarch offers, "I also try to cut back a bit on my nosiness. I mean, knowing every single detail about everything, investigating and eliciting a slave's every occupation, a friend's every action, a son's every pastime, a wife's every whisper. This leads to many outbursts of anger, one after another every day, and these in turn add up to a habitual discontent and surliness.